That's so brilliant! This video is sponsored by Case Filters. Wide-angle photography can lead to really extremely powerful images, but just if you consider a couple of things. Wide-angle photography is not difficult actually. I would say instead it's just difficult to get in when you're used to using normal lenses or longer lenses maybe. So with this video I bundled together some really useful tips for you, which I had wished to know already when I started with my wide-angle photography many years ago. So let's dive in, let's have a look how to master wide-angle photography. Hi my friends, very nice to see you. Today I'm going to tell you how to bring your wide-angle photography to a master level. You know, wide-angle is what we call the focal range below 50 mm on full frame, and ultra-wide-angle is everything below 24 mm. So ultra-wide-angle is a part of wide-angle actually. Okay, the first problem I want to solve for you today is struggling to find a wide-angle composition. And we struggle especially then when we try to use a wide-angle lens like a normal lens or even like a longer lens. So what do I mean by that? Now basically there exist two base architectures of compositions, and the difference between them two is actually the interface between reality and the final image. Let's say a print for instance, as the final result of our photography. So two types of architectures. And the first one is what I call linear composition interface. Trust me, it sounds just difficult, but it's totally easy. Just imagine we would have a print like this here, and we would hang it up on the wall. And now let's imagine we would look at this image. It is a bit like we would look into a window, right? So what we see here is exactly what a person would see when he or she would be out there on location. Maybe the colors are different, maybe the tonality is different, but all in all, this is how reality looks. So when you're out there and you spot a view like that and you like it, you will do quite easy to find a composition like this one. So this is the linear composition interface. There is simply a linearity between reality and the final image. Just that you can visualize that. Imagine a beautiful landscape and that we have a kind of window which gets one by one onto our sensor. In that case we use a linear composition interface. We see the image already out on location and we just look into that window. Yeah, it is all about the subject, nice mountains maybe there will be some elements overlapping the mountains, but all in all we are capturing this window. But this behavior of getting this window one by one onto our sensor is just for focal lengths around 50 mm and above. Now when we go shorter with our focal length, we have the chance to get our image more abstract, to get them even maybe more spectacular. But therefore we have to understand the second type of compositional architecture. And this is what I call a banded composition interface. A complicated word as well, but trust me, also here it is much easier than it sounds. But for a banded interface, or for a banded composition interface, we have to think in a different way. Let's take a print with a banded composition interface, like this here. And I mean, yeah, it's still an image, it's still a window, we can look into it, right? So for the viewer of the print, it doesn't make a big difference. It looks linear, but there is a big difference for the photographer. Because when you're out on location, out in reality, at that spot, it doesn't look like that. It looks different. There are obvious things like it is stretched, the distant elements seem to be even further away. We have a distortion which is given due to the architecture of a wide-angle lens. And these are obvious things for most photographers already before they buy their first wide-angle lens. But the not so obvious thing is that the interface between reality and the final image is not linear, it's banded. So what do I mean by that? Now we have to consider that when we are out on location and we just look at the landscape, we are usually on eye level and we look straight to anything we love. So when I spot anything beautiful in the distance, let's say a light ray maybe which breaks through the clouds or so and illuminating a meadow, I will see that of course, but I will not see my feet at the same moment, right? Because therefore I need to look down obviously. But I don't do that because I'm looking to that light ray in the distance. Now, an ultra-wide-angle lens offers us exactly that. An ultra-wide-angle lens has a bigger angle of view than the person has out on location. So what we can do is we can combine a scene in the distance with that what is happening straight in front of our feet. There is no linearity anymore between reality and the final image. The final image will always be a straight window. But a wide-angle lens doesn't capture distances linearly. With a wide-angle lens, we bend the distance actually. So we are able to bring a distant scene and a close foreground into our scene without the need to go down to the feet level, where all the elements would just overlap. Let me give you an example. Now, this is one of the first wide-angle images I've ever taken. And yeah, I mean, it is not totally bad, but I made a big beginner mistake. I went down to feet level, and this is why we can't see any midground. Now, I've been to that spot again recently, and this time with the knowledge about banded composition architecture. And this helped me to get a much better image. What I've done is I didn't go down to feet level anymore, I went up even higher with my camera position. And then I did one important thing. I tilted my lens down, straight to my feet. Yeah, I mean, maybe not totally to my feet, but quite close to them. And that led to a much more powerful image. We have a midground here, which connects the foreground with the distance. The entire image is more powerful, more pleasing. And the thing is, it didn't look exactly that bad when I was out on location. I saw the distant view, and then I looked for a fitting foreground to tell this winterly story. So tilting your wide-angle lens down is a quite good idea. And also in this image here, I tilted my lens down to get this effect of rolling into the scene actually. Especially the image on portrait orientation emphasize this effect of rolling in, because we use a wider angle of view to the distance. But it works also with landscape orientation, of course, so like in this one. Let me also show you even an extreme example. Now, this image here was taken with my 12mm on full frame, so my tripod legs were straight beside my frame. Yeah, I really photographed totally down here in the foreground. The sense of depth is amazing in this image, isn't it? But sometimes it could also be a good idea to take your lens up to the sky, yeah, when we have no really close foreground or something like that, and the sky is amazing. For this image here, for instance, I tilted my camera more up so that I got this spectacular sky in. But this just works when a bigger part of the sky looks spectacular. Most of the time I tilt my lens down, to be honest. Let me also visualize the banded composition interface for you. We are photographing towards these nice mountains again, but this time our interface is not a vertical window in the distance anymore. We have the window more like that. And this is also why it supports this effect of rolling into the frame. We pull our viewers into the image. The sense of depth gets amazing. So tilting your wide-angle lens is a good idea. This can lead to much better results. But I would not always do that. There are also exceptions, of course. I would say it depends on the architecture of the composition itself. When we use a big center object, for instance, and when we are quite close to this center object, it can be better to decide anyway for a linear composition interface when using a wide-angle lens. Or in other words, we can use a wide-angle lens then more like a normal lens in that case. A good example is my image from Dresime. I used 18mm here. In this case I went a bit up higher at the opposite mountain and I photographed straight to the mountain without tilting. And as I was quite close to the mountain, I needed the wide-angle lens just to get the entire mountain into the frame, to be honest. And this was a spectacular day of landscape photography, by the way. If you haven't seen the video, I will link it up here for you. And also in this image here, I had a big center object, and so it was more important for me to get the composition to work around the center object, so that the sky worked up there and also the field of rocks and the lines down there. Tilting down or up in that case, had not led to a better image in this case. So a good tip is also always think about big center objects as well. And there's much more how to master wide-angle photography, how to get stronger photographs. Before I will tell you that, my friends, if you like this video, please give me a thumb up. You know, it helps me, it helps the algorithm, and it helps also other photographers out there to find this video better on YouTube. So thank you therefore. Well, now we know about linear and banded architecture of compositions, but we should also talk about a quite bad behavior of wide-angle lenses and how we can turn that even to our advantage. You know, when we take a shot, let's say with 50 millimeters, we get a quite clear window of reality onto our sensor. Or in other words, we get the light one by one from reality onto our sensor. But when we go quite short with our focal length, let's imagine something like 60 millimeters for instance, or even shorter, we get much more of that reality onto our sensor. We could even say the light gets compressed actually, so that it fits on that same sensor size, on the same monitor size, on the same paper size when we print it afterwards. When we break it down, it is a kind of optical compression. But this is a quite complex process. Just think about the light has to go all the way through the lens, through different lens elements to the sensor, and it also gets corrected in there. So it's really a complex process, and the compression is not equally to every part of our frame. In the center of our frame, the compression is different to the compression on the edges. And ultimately, this compression gets visible as a kind of distortion. At the edges and even at the corners, everything gets more stretched than in the center, where the proportions are more natural. And as a photographer, we have to deal with that kind of distortion. It depends on what we are going to photograph actually. When we want to photograph anything where the viewer knows already from his experience how it should look, we should try to place the element more to the center, or let's say at least not totally to the edges. In this way, we avoid distortion, or let's say we reduce distortion. I think this nails it much better, because we never get totally rid of it. This image here was taken with 10 millimeters on APS-C. We know that these verticals of the ring have to be vertical, they have to be lines. It would look strange when they would be curved or so, right? So for this image it was a good idea to bring the ring more to the center, to avoid distortion. It is not totally in the center, but I try to bring it closer to the center, away from the edges. But on the other hand, at these rocks down here, we have amazingly much distortion actually. But we can't tell it, because we don't know how the rocks really looked in reality. I mean, I know it because I photographed it, but a viewer will never know that it didn't look like that. And there's absolutely no problem with that at all. Same with the bush up there, it gets stretched a bit to the right, but it is still okay, it still looks natural, because we don't know how the bush really looked. Also because it's small enough, by the way. But in this image here, it was taken with 25 millimeters, it had definitely not been a good idea to place this person more to the left, because this had led to an unhappy distortion. The person would get more stretched apart, it would look thicker in that case. And as it was my wife, what should I say? I mean, it's healthier to place here more to the center. Just trust me here. But we can use distortion even to our advantage. We know that elements close to the edge get more stretched than elements in the center. Now, what would happen if we would place, let's say, a mountain close to the edge? And you know it already, it gets stretched apart, and it looks even higher in that case. You don't need to place it totally to the edges, it gets already stretched just by placing the tiny bit more to the edges. It's just to support this natural size of the mountain. But also the foreground gets stretched more apart, of course. Let's have a look at this image again. I was so close to my foreground with my 12mm lens, it got amazingly stretched apart. It really didn't look like that in reality, without distortion. The foreground would definitely not look as spectacular as it does. Well, another important thing to consider is, due to the wide angle, we get a lot of elements into our frame. And when I say a lot, I really mean a lot. The shorter you go, the more elements you get in, obviously. So with an ultra wide angle lens, you get almost the entire world into your frame actually. So we have to be careful what we include in our composition and where we include it. It is really like that. Whenever I build up a composition, I think about every single component. And this is easy for a longer focal lengths, as we use a more linear composition architecture. We have just to consider the elements of that distance layer, and also maybe the overlapping elements in front of that, of course. Let's remember, as soon as we use a banded composition architecture, as soon as we go higher with our camera and photograph a bit more from above, we unveil a lot of additional elements which have to be considered in our composition, of course. So for wide-angle compositions, I tend to take really a lot of time. An hour is even more on the shorter side, to be honest. I mean, it's always different, of course. Sometimes I need longer, sometimes I'm much faster. It depends a bit on the terrain maybe, and how complex the landscape is, and also my personal conditions on a particular day, of course. So an important tip here is don't rush. Take the time it needs to master the composition. I often see images in the workshops and also on social media where I just think 15 or 30 minutes more and the image would be a masterpiece. I absolutely love to use wide-angle lenses, as a lot of landscape photographers do actually, and I think one of the reasons therefore is because it helps us to bring more abstractness into our image, to get our image more abstract. We talked already about the banded architecture of a composition, and we also talked about the distortion. So a wide-angle shot will never look exactly like reality. I would even say it leads to a more abstract version of reality, and this is what fine art photography is all about. We try to create something new with the integrity of the artist, the photographer in that case. And by the way, if you're interested in getting your photography to art, to get into fine art photography, I made already a video about that, and I will link it up there for you. Yeah, a wide-angle lens can help here to get abstractness. But the thing is, I see a lot of photographers who really always use the widest lens, and that always on the shortest end all the time. And in my experience, that's not the best idea. You will get an abstract version of reality through, but the chance is high that your composition doesn't work in the end. Because again, with using a wide-angle lens, you get so many elements into your composition, and not every element makes sense in your composition. And sometimes it's better to relinquish for some elements to get a stronger photo. So what I do is I always consider the rough distance area first, a beautiful mountain range or whatever, and then I look for a fitting foreground. And with the foreground and my distance area combined, I decide on the right focal length to include all the elements I need and to exclude all the elements I don't want to have in my composition. I got a new 12 to 24 millimeters lens already, I think, 2 months before I used it first time. I had it 2 months in my bag and never used it because it didn't make sense. When we break it down, it isn't all about the lens, it isn't all about the focal length, it is all about the composition and the story or the narrative you want your image to say. The lens is just a tool which helps us to catch our composition. So in my experience, it is a good idea to cover a broad spectrum of focal length and to decide on the right focal length according to the composition. And if you're interested in more details, my whole process of how I decide on focal lengths, watch this video here. My friends, I hope you liked this video. If yes, please share it with your friends and don't forget to tune in next week. There will come a fantastic video as well. And thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.